Hello and welcome to the Brand Therapist Podcast. I'm your host, Yamoka Rodriguez. I am super excited. This is a solo podcast, but I have something super special for you today. So if you haven't yet done this, go to Amazon and get the Brand Therapist workbooks because they're amazing. So there are a new set of workbooks dependent on each of the different archetypes. So if you don't know your archetype, go to Bespoke Branding, BESPOKE branding.io and find your brand archetype so you can get the book. But to that, I wanted to talk to you about opposites, polarity. Now, this concept of polarity or tension or whatever we want to call it, we have it throughout everything in our lives, right? Sometimes it can be polarity between a negative and a positive, like, good and bad. But polarity also is like dark and light. We have the yin and yang. It doesn't mean that one's better than the other. There's just polar opposites. We also have that through characteristics. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Personality opposites, which means that is what we're striving for. I call it the superfan model, but you can also call it the growth model. And one of the things I like to talk about when I talk about polarity or opposites attract or superfan is the amazing thing that we can do is to build tension. It makes things more interesting, right? If we have our whole house in white, right? The kitchen is white, the living room is white, everything's white. It kind of gets boring. So adding some dark accents, some contrast makes it super interesting. So that's really what we want to do, is to add those tension, those contrast, those things that make it unique, different, interesting. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So within each of our personalities, we have an opposite. And I've talked this about before, but I want to change the conversation to really have a discussion around what does it mean to really look at your opposite? What does it mean as an individual? And what does it mean to build tension? Now, we know that the people who we want to attract are our opposites. And I have a podcast on this that I've done before about really understanding your opposites so you can really attract those individuals, because those are the individuals that are going to love what you do, keep purchasing for you, giving you referrals. And so really looking at that opposite is essential. But what I wanted to talk about today is how that opposite takes you to your self-actualization. And how do you go from your personality to extend yourself to that opposite? What does that help us with? Growth, development. It helps us see things differently from somebody else's perspective. Now, I don't know, I'm sure you've known this, but if you're at work or your friends or whatever kind of group that you like to hang about, we have different personalities, right? Somebody's more like this, somebody's more quiet, somebody's more active and they like to talk more, or somebody's, more serious, and some of us are more nerds, or we like to look at beautiful things. And we're all different kinds of personalities, and that shows up in our friendships. So we cannot expect somebody to treat us the way we want to be treated when they have a different personality or different things that they love. So we all want to be treated in a way that we feel cared for. So we're going to talk about how do you extend your personality towards that opposite. But the first thing we need to know, and I have this little cheat sheet over here, which is pretty amazing. It has all the 12 archetypes and their opposites, right? So first of all, you need to know your archetype. Like I said, if you don't know it, go to bespokebranding.io, click on brand quiz, take the quiz and find out your archetype. So once you know your archetype, you need to find the opposite. So I'm going to tell you the 12 archetypes, and then we're going to talk about each of the different opposites and how do we start to think about using or looking at that extension of ourselves towards that opposite. So in the belonging quadrant, we have caregiver, lover, and we also have girl next door, good guy. Those are in the belonging. Then we have the opposite of belonging, right? Which is independent. In the independent side, we have hero, innocent, and explorer. So the opposite of lover is explorer, and the opposite of explorer is lover. So how do we think about the tension that builds there, right? So remember, the lover is all about passion and love and compassion in relationships. So remember, they're in the belonging. Their primary piece is about relationships. The explorer is more about adventure, curiosity. What is the new thing? Trying to figure out what they're doing through exploration. And so their primary thing is doing that from an independent standpoint. So what can we learn from each other? So if you're an explorer, you may want to understand how to bring relationship, compassion, and passion into what you do. And if you're a lover, how do you bring adventure and curiosity to what you do? So that's really interesting. Now, in the book, for example, if you get the Lover Workbook, you will find a series of exercises on how to attract the explorer. And you can use that also for messaging, looking at how you want to connect. But it's really critical sometimes when we only connect as what we are, which is important, the lover, we miss out that uniqueness, that extension. When you bring in some curiosity or some exploration, that makes things a little bit more interesting. So let's look at the caregiver. The opposite of caregiver is hero. So what happens in that relationship, right? The caregiver is about support, helping others. And again, relationship, nurturing. And the hero is about impact, challenge, getting to their mission. And so how does that relationship kind of facilitate that tension, that extension, or that transition? And so thinking about if you're a caregiver, how do you talk more about impact? How do you bring challenge to what you do? And if you're a hero, how do you bring support and nurturing? And those things are really tension. Those is what we call opposites. You know, it's not like black and white or dark and light. It's more about those subtleties in personalities. And those are opposite personalities, the caregiver and the hero. The last one that we have in that quadrant is girl next door, good guy. The opposite of that is innocent. So the innocent is all about purity. They're an independent quadrant, and they really look at things from what's the right thing to do, right? They're also very idealistic. In the girl next door, good guy, they're a little bit more practical, but they're about relationships, tribe, connection. So there is a really nice tension between the innocent, the girl next door, and good guy. Because while the girl next door, good guy is trying to make things more for the tribe, for the people, for the good of the people, that innocent is trying to bring some idealism to that, is trying to bring some purity to that. And so that is a really great tension between the two. So now we go to the other two opposite quadrants, which let's go to the dynamic. We have magician, we have outlaw, and we have performer. And on the other side of that, we have the stable archetypes, which are the creator, the sage, and the ruler. So let's start with the magician-ruler relationship. So the magician is all about vision. Remember, they're dynamic. They make things happen. And sometimes people are like, how do they say this and they make it happen? They're kind of magical in that way. And then the rulers are more about control. They need to know what is happening. They also like things that are more status driven. And so that relationship between the magician and the ruler is really interesting because the magician is trying always to make magic, while the ruler is always trying to get to the next level, to do more, to be more successful. And so that tension, the ruler always finds the magician super magical, and the magician always finds the ruler super successful. So that tension between the two is pretty incredible in learning to understand what the magician wants or what the ruler wants is really important, because that helps you grow as an individual. Then we have the outlaw and the creator. So the outlaw is much about the rebel. They want to do things differently, right? They want to break convention. Versus the creator wants to create new things. They're always looking about innovating. They want to be masterful too. And it's important for them to craft things, the detail of things. So that tension between the outlaw, which they're not really detail focused, to really understanding what these creators love and crafting that, but also being different, right? And so the creators love outlaws because they're always trying to break the rules. And the outlaws love creators because they're so imaginative and love to create things from nothing. And then our last one, the last tension, is between the performer and the sage. This tension is really interesting because you have the performer who's much outgoing, right? They're in the dynamic side and they love being happy and joyful and talking and performing. They're really great at that. And so the opposite of that is what we have, the sage, like the studious, the information, they gather information, they want information. They're very good at having that knowledge, that understanding, and they have it all at their fingertips. Really smart individuals that sometimes we call nerds, but really great, amazing information gatherers. And so that tension between, the sage that's super studious to the performer that's always about, let's have fun, let's be in the moment, let's enjoy life. That tension between the two is pretty interesting. So if we're a performer, gathering more of that sage or understanding more of that knowledge is really important as we elevate and go to actualization. And the opposite is also true. Like when you are a sage and you bring in more joy, more happiness, more movement, be more dynamic, then that also creates that beautiful tension. And so besides really understanding how can we use this, what is the use of understanding our opposites? Why do we want to do this? And I have to say, my next book is going to be about superfan and opposites and that tension and all those things. I wanted to really help you understand why is it so critical. So once we understand our own archetype, and once we're using and messaging and writing and visualizing everything from our particular brand, it's time to then bring in some tension, and bringing in some tension with our opposite. So how do we bring in messaging that brings those two together, right? And so if you go to the book, you're going to see the 5 value words. And a super simple way to do this is to take the 5 value words of the explorer and the 5 value words of the lover and really see how you can make sentences or use those to create language, messaging, sales copy to really attract that opposite individual. Now, one of the things to note that is really important is that sometimes we're like, well, we want to attract more than just our opposite, right? And really, your job is to just attract the opposite. You're going to bring in other people. It always happens. It doesn't mean you're only attracting the opposite. You're going to bring others. But remember, your opposite is the one that's going to really love what you do, bring you referrals, is going to talk about you. And so that's really the focus. And then others will come, right? Just like the sun is kind of at the center, and we have all these things that are built around the sun. Some are further away, some are closer. So really maintaining that perspective of trying to attract the closest to you, that doesn't mean you're not going to attract others as you extend yourself. It's just a way to really think about honing into your message, honing in to what you're doing. So that's one of the reasons why we want to do that. But the other reason, which is also very important, the reason why you want to do that is because you're going to learn more about yourself as you think about your opposite. And there's just really interesting things or really interesting exercises that you can do to say, let me put myself in my opposite shoes. How would I do that? I've had clients where they're like, oh yeah, my opposite is this. And I probably have to have, like, for example, a magician was saying, probably have to have some VIP versions of this. And I find it interesting sometimes when magicians kind of reject that because it's something that they haven't completely acknowledged or actually really felt connected to. So it's also important to understand what are the things that you don't like about your opposite, and try to figure out what are those things. Because one of the most important things to do, and this is just a big tip, is to bring the unconscious to the conscious. That's the part of psychology that's really important as human beings for us to do. And so if we're conscious of our character, if we're conscious of our opposite, then we can create magic. So that is what I wanted to talk about today. Please visit the website if you don't know your brand character yet at bespokebranding.io and check out the new workbooks that are out. There's 12, actually there's 13. So if you want just your particular archetype, you can get that. It's called Brand Therapist Workbook, Lover, Brand Therapist Workbook, Magician. So each of the 12 of those. Or if you want the Master Workbook, which is so exciting, then you can get the Archetypal Master Workbook, which has all 12 of them. It's about 400-page book, and it has all 12 of the archetypes. So as we continue on our journey of building our brand, really building our personal brand, what is going to really connect you to who you are, as well as leaving an impact, right? Leaving a legacy for yourself. We want to build our personal brand, especially now when everything is not always, face to face. We have social media, building your social media presence, building your personality. Who are you? What does that do for you? It actually builds trust with your audience. The more they know you, the more they trust you. And that's critical for business. So I'm going to leave you with that. And I'm so excited about this podcast and the coming podcast, which we're going to get much more detail into that. Thank you for being here on the Brand Therapist Podcast, and I'll see you on the next one.